From the Sanskrit saying Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which translates to the world is one family. This resonates strongly in India's G20 theme of one earth, one family, one future. India's Mission LiFE, Lifestyle for Environment, launched by the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi this October, aims at charting a pathway for people worldwide to strive towards achieving the 2030 agenda. The Development Working Group envisages an ambitious outcome on LiFE in the coming months, and we are looking forward, ladies and gentlemen, to hear the perspectives of the erudite luminaries in our midst, the stellar array of global experts during the conversations today. We now have an audio-visual on Mission LiFE to give you more insight into this ambitious vision for global action. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention on this screen? Let's take a look at this audio visual. So we're going to be playing a special audio visual for you, ladies and gentlemen, but we're just waiting for you to take your seats at the back. Thank you very much. Please be seated. We have a very special audio visual on Mission LiFE, LiFE, which is Lifestyle for Environment. This is the session on infusing new life into green development. And this particular video will delve more and give you more perspective and insight into this ambitious vision for global action. Let's take a look at the audio visual now.
From everyone that the world is changing. Say, you sound wrong. That's how I know that the change is not for the better. But how did we get here? I also want the world to change, but I want it to change for the better. In 2030, I will be 21. Millions like me will be stepping into an age of hope and optimism. Shouldn't the world match our dreams, our potential? 2030, isn't that the year by when the world committed itself to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals? That's 2,000 days from now. Can we do something together? I think we can. I know we can. When I look around, I see we are already doing a few things right. Maybe only a few among us are doing it. Maybe we're continuing a little, but that's how life starts. Life, do you know what I heard it first?
Yes, life. L-I-F-E. Life. It's new participants. Life.
It's a movement by every single person, for communities, for organizations, for policymakers, for governments, for nations. And how will this movement of life start? With just 5 steps. First step, what are it's always starts. Now it's already much changing. Now I'm really ready to Second step, take a step, okay? Third, make a choice. There we are. And ignore. We have more choices.
Society में
पर कुछ चीजें नॉन नेगोशिएबल हैं जैसे वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग एंड सोलर पैनल
सोलर पैनल देश की इंडस्ट्री रिस्पांसिबिलिटी है
पहले कस्टमर आपका आते थे ब्रांड के लिए प्राइस के लिए वारंटी के लिए अब कस्टमर आते हैं हमारे पास फाइल का रेटिंग के लिए रेटिंग के लिए
आजकल ज्यादातर ई बाइक यूज करनी होती है अच्छा लगता है
The first step, simple. You switch on light, just switch off. And the fifth step, spread the word to spread the movement. My country has renewed its commitment to the planet. Of your words and act. It's time for you to join us. Act.
Ladies and gentlemen, India has given a global call to action with Mission LiFE. And I now take the privilege of inviting the Indian G20 Sherpa, Shri Amitabh Kant, who is going to be in conversation with Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Let's welcome them both on stage with a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Shri Amitabh Kant and Dr. Arunabha Ghosh on stage. Namaskar and welcome, sir. I now request you, Dr. Ghosh, to please take over the proceedings.
Yes. Good afternoon and welcome back after the lunch. And since this session is about infusing new life into green development, no one better than India's G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to tell us a little bit more about what Mission Life means for G20. Mr. Kant, the G20 is about creating consensus, bringing economies together, bridging divides to solve global crises. Where does sustainable lifestyle and mission life fit in driving a new deal for green development across the world?
So thanks. Let me first welcome all our guests here today. It's wonderful to have all of them from different parts of the world joining us for this session on life. And life is critical because, a country like India, for instance, we will be doing urbanization on a very rapid pace in the coming years. In the next 5 decades, you'll see 500 million Indians getting into the process of urbanization. That's like building 2 Americas. Every 3 years, you'll be doing a completely new Chicago, for instance. Now, you cannot follow the model of urbanization which the Western world has done. When America urbanized, gas, water, everything was freely available. And therefore, America had the luxury of creating sprawling cities. You could build cities for cars and not for people. So the American car companies actually bought over the railway companies and destroyed them so that cars could sell. The American model was to build urbanization across its highways. And the challenge now for a country like India and many developing countries of the world is to do a model which is totally different. And that is that you do compact, dense urbanization. And that would mean that you create cities for walking, for cycling, for renewable energy, for electric mobility, a totally different model of, so this would require a totally different kind of a growth model. This would require a different, you will have to actually train your urban planners for another pattern of urbanization, which Indian planners are not equipped to. They've all been trained in the American model of urbanization. You will have to bring in a lot of behavioral change. And when you talk about lifestyle for sustainability, it's actually a lot to do with nudging behavior. And nudging behavior is what Richard Thaler and Carl Sunstein talk about. That is, it's not countries which will make a difference. It's individual and community behavior which will make a
So you've talked about nudge, you've talked about individual behavior, but you also talked about the developing world, the emerging economies. So how does this individual behavior aggregate at a national, at an economy-wide level, whether it's renewables, whether it's green hydrogen? Could you reflect a little bit about how India is thinking about this movement at a national level?
So, you know, if you look at the overall carbon space available to the world at 1.5 degrees centigrade, 2,400 gigatons, let's look at a country like India, you know, specifically. We have not contributed to carbonizing the world. Our contribution is 1.5% per capita wise. You're entitled to about close to 18%. We've not contributed to it. But irrespective of that, we are going to industrialize, and therefore the challenge for India is to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. Now, if you want to industrialize without carbonizing the world, renewable is one component, because electricity is just 20% of your energy. So even if you do 100% of your electricity, it'll be just 20% of your energy. The balance is 80% is all hard to abate sectors. It's refineries, it's fertilizer, it's steel, it's cement, it's long distance transport. And the challenge, as I see it, is that you need to decarbonize hard to abate sectors. And that would mean that you need to use renewable, to crack water, use electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen and decarbonize these sectors. Now, India, for instance, is climatically blessed. India doesn't have competition in that field from China. Your competition, if there is any, is from Middle East in terms of climatic condition. And you are already a consumer of gray hydrogen of about 11%. So if you are able to decarbonize your refineries, your steel, your cement, the potential for India to be the production center of the world the export center of the world, the technology center of the world, the R&D center of the world, the electrolyzer manufacturing of the world is huge. And what it would lead to is then a completely new model of development. That is a model of development which is focused on renewable, which is focused on green hydrogen, and which is focused on electric mobility. And that, it's very important to say that LiFE is not about being anti-consumerism. It's about a completely new model of development which involves a behavioral change towards completely new areas of growth, new urbanization, new transportation, new circular economy, a new method of actually moving forward to decarbonize your fossil growth sectors. The Prime Minister has already said in his Independence Day address that India should be independent from fossil fuel import by 2047, by the time it becomes 100. You're already doing about $200 billion worth of fossil fuel import. This is going to go up to about $350 billion in the next 15 years. Now, India will not have the capacity to do that unless and until it doesn't use its hugely blessed climatic condition to become a massive producer of green hydrogen.
You talked about India and other emerging countries being fast urbanizing economies. These are also countries that have very young populations.
Yeah.
What is this new model of development that the youth could both aspire to, but also drive? Can we create a circular economy unicorn in India?
Well, you can, but circular economy is a it's a complex process. I mean, circular economy can be done if you do this process of R&D, where every input is actually an output into something else. Circular economy, you can't retrofit. You need to do a lot of innovation from the design stage itself. For every startup to say that I'm going to become a circular economy startup means that everything you produce is designed as an input into something else. And therefore, the backward forward linkages into manufacturing process has to be very, very tightly thought through. A lot of research, a lot of development, a lot of innovation has to go in. And therefore, while India's emerged as a great startup nation in the world, a huge amount of work has to be done by young entrepreneurs. A lot of disruption has to be done in many of these fields in the circular economy. Trying to say that I want to be a circular economy nation by retrofitting is a very difficult job. It requires huge amount of R&D and innovation.
Last question, Mr. Khan. This side event, of course, is happening on the sidelines of what is going to be the first meeting of the Development Working Group. So what would be your message to other delegates from the G20 countries of how Mission LiFE can also drive a new agenda for the Development Working Group?
So one is that governments across the world, and their track record has been extremely poor. They will give long-term commitments they will never fulfill. If you want to transform the world in terms of a net zero world by 2050, individuals and communities will have to take a lot of responsibility. And that would mean that a completely new model of growth, a completely new model of development has to emerge from the emerging nations in terms of transportation, in terms of urbanization, in terms of plastics, in terms of circular economy. That is really the key, that the developing economies must become the nations to industrialize without carbonizing.
We will deliberate through the afternoon how exactly we can do that, so we can provide those inputs into your discussions with the G20 Development Working Group. Thank you, Mr. Khan, for kicking us off on sustainable lifestyle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shrikant, for inspiring us and actually encouraging us to step up and become champions of Mission LiFE. Also, this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, sets the context for the discussions ahead. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for leading the conversation. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have a special message for India's G20 presidency. Also, the G20 delegates who will drive these important discussions over the coming months, and the people of India, from Her Majesty Queen of Bhutan, Jetsun Pema Wangchuk. Let's take a look at that video message.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings and best wishes from His Majesty the King and the people of Bhutan. Our congratulations to India on assuming the presidency of the G20. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, we are confident that India will discharge its important responsibilities of the presidency with great prudence and success. We extend our best wishes to Prime Minister Modi and the Government of India. It is a privilege to address this side event of the Development Working Group on infusing new life into green development. We commend and support the launch of Mission LiFE by Prime Minister Modi, which closely echoes Bhutan's long-standing commitment to sustainability and environmental preservation. Along with India, we are dedicated to addressing one of the most complex and significant challenges of our time, climate change. As scientists continue to reveal alarming rates of global warming in a world stretched thin for resources, Bhutan became the world's first carbon-negative country, with our forests absorbing about 3 times more carbon dioxide emissions than we emit. And we have pledged to remain a net carbon sink for all times to come. In framing an approach to holistic development and progress, the people of Bhutan have nurtured a deep-rooted reverence for our natural environment. Today, Bhutan's development philosophy centers around the principle of environmental protection and sustainable socio-economic development. But if changing realities bring new ambitions and goals, it must also bring new plans and preparations. Bhutan is committed to ensuring the survival and continued vibrance of our natural heritage. We are aware that this will require concerted efforts in order to balance cultural and environmental conservation with economic prosperity. 2 months ago, in October, Bhutan held the inaugural snowman race. The race was initiated by His Majesty the King to bring global attention to climate change and its devastating consequences. Known as the world's toughest climate action race, top runners from across the world journeyed over some of the last untouched landscapes of Bhutan's mountain ranges. People living in these remote communities have contributed the least to climate change, and yet are the most vulnerable to its consequences. Our glaciers, which are water reserves sustaining over 1 billion lives, are disappearing and are at constant risk of flooding. The snowman race ended with the climate conclave to consolidate our commitment and chart the way forward. Bhutan has also scaled up our conservation efforts with the launch of programs such as the Bhutan for Life flagship project that creates sustainable financing, the first of its kind in Asia, to permanently safeguard Bhutan's network of protected areas. The positive impacts of the project goes well beyond Bhutan, with the protection of endangered flora and fauna species, as well as the conservation of critical watersheds and forests. A huge step to finding solutions to global problems like climate change and averting future crises will be taken if we can think in the spirit of community and identify individual actions that can make a difference. We are aware that climate change is the most significant threat facing youth and children across the world. Save the Children estimates that by 2040, 1 in 4 children will be living in areas with extreme water shortages as a result of the climate crisis, while currently 160 million children are exposed to increasingly severe and prolonged droughts. We have a duty to ensure that our children inherit a livable planet. It is integral that we always remain mindful of how our decisions and actions today impact the well-being of future generations. So I understand this to be the intention of the LiFE campaign, and I take this opportunity to thank the Government of India and UNEP India office for amplifying this initiative globally. We stand with our neighbor and close friend India to urge for global action on this front. We have a colossal challenge on our hands, one that no country or company or individual can tackle alone. If each of us does our part, we can put humanity back into harmony with nature and leave for future generations a world of peace, prosperity, equality, and happiness. Thank you and tashdele.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank Her Majesty, the Queen of Bhutan, Jetsun Pema Wangchuk, for her message of solidarity and cooperation as well as peace. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I take the privilege of once again inviting the Indian G20 Sherpa, Shri Amitabh Kant, on stage, this time for a group photographs with all our speakers. May I invite Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA, Dr. Atsushi Watabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies, Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair, the Energy and Resources Institute, and from our Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, UN, Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, Times Network, Ms. Ligia Norona, UN Assistant Secretary General and Head of UNEP New York Office, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite Mr. Stephen Sikars, Director, Division of Circular Economy and Environmental Protection, UNIDO, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, Innovator and Education Reformist, Dr. Shannon B. Olson, Global Director, the Eco Network. We have Dr. Shannon B. Olson, Global Director from the Eco Network. I invite you all to please grace the stage for a group photograph. May I also invite the DWG co-chairs to join us on stage, please. May I invite Sri Naidu and Ms. Gambhir to please grace the stage, ladies and gentlemen. Can we have a big round of applause for the dignitaries gracing the dais? Thank you so much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apprise you that the United Nations has been a champion of Mission LiFE, with Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres gracing the launch of LiFE. Today, we have a message from the UN Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, on this special occasion. We'll take a look at that audio visual, please.
Excellencies, my warm congratulations.
Excellencies, I warmly congratulate India for assuming the presidency of the G20 and thank the Development Working Group meeting for convening today's event on infusing new life into green development. The Lifestyle for the Environment, or LiFE movement, is a welcomed reminder that both individuals and collectives have a role to play in tackling our shared challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, poverty, hunger, social unrest and inequalities, and the climate emergency are all on the rise. These crises are not only pushing us further away from the Sustainable Development Goals as we reach the halfway mark to 2030, but also undermining our collective ability to withstand future crises. As the UN Secretary-General reiterated at the recently concluded COP27, we need all hands on deck. And we need India's leadership in this pivotal historic moment to keep the G20 together and fulfill its promise of delivering a more stable and equal world for all. The world needs an SDG stimulus plan to bring our sustainable development goals back on track by mobilizing and accelerating long-term, low-interest, sustainable financing in support of a just transition for all. Driven by the leadership of India, we hope to see the G20 take concrete actions to implement such a plan. The UN will remain fully committed to pursuing this effort, including through the work of the UNDP as Secretariat of the Sustainable Finance Working Group. Under India's G20 presidency, which marks the first ever developing country troika ahead of Brazil and South Africa's presidencies, we look forward to greater engagement from the Development Working Group in upcoming meetings, including the SDG Summit and the high-level dialogue on financing planned for 2023. Excellencies, the time has come to infuse new life into green development. The United Nations stands ready to support India's G20 presidency to this end, and through this, see the G20's collective actions on sustainable development rise to new heights. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time indeed has come to infuse new life into the Sustainable Development Goals. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to inform all of you that we have Shri Parameshwaran Iyer, the CEO of NITI Aayog, who's going to be joining us live from New Delhi. And he has a presentation on Mission Life. Also, he's going to talk about how India envisages rolling out this ambitious mission for millions of people across the world. Mr. Iyer, if you can hear us, ladies and gentlemen, let's connect with Shri Parameshwaran Iyer.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you in Mumbai. I'm sorry I couldn't be there today due to another pressing engagement in Delhi, but very happy to talk to you about life. Already heard from Amitabh and Arunabha about sort of big picture on life. I'm going to give you share a presentation in which we talk about how Mission Life is proposed to be rolled out both nationally as well as internationally. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. So hopefully you can see the screen. So as Amitabh said, again, this is a people's movement. And in Hindi, we refer to that as a Jan Andolan. It's essentially how individuals and communities act, sort of walk the talk on promoting a sort of climate-friendly and environmentally conscious life. So let me, where do I go to the next? Okay, here we go. So this presentation is very brief, but 4 parts to it. So what is Mission Life? You saw the opening video in the beginning. That was the video launched by the Prime Minister and the UN Secretary General on the 20th of October in Gujarat. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about life in India, life globally, and then life in G20 to be more specific. Now, as all of you know, at COP26, Prime Minister Modi, first referred to lifestyle for the environment. And, this was the first time where a head of government had actually spoken about this at an international forum and given quite a sort of, and spoke about the sort of key elements of life. And so that's when we first heard about it in November 2021. Now, how can these individual behaviors, we heard talking about it's time for people to take action, right? We can't wait for the developed world and all the conversations which are going on, while that will go on in parallel on climate change and how do you address it. It's time to take action at scale. So this is how individuals can actually impact climate change in a positive manner. So some very specific examples. water, on average, we all waste more than 2.5 liters of water daily. Electricity, what all of us can do individually in terms of turning lights, air conditioners, heaters were not in use. You can save up to 282 kilowatts of energy per day. Food, a huge challenge globally. Food wastage, there have been a number of international conferences on this. But what we do know is that on average, we waste about 500 grams of food every single day. Fuel, just 30 minutes of red light idling wastes nearly 1 liter of fuel. So all of us can make contributions to protect the climate and the environment. And therefore, if you look at these actions we have chosen, they deal both with mitigation in terms of reducing emissions, but also in terms of adaptation. If we have water scarcity, how can people adapt to water scarcity? So it cuts across both the mitigation and adaptation discussion. Now, again, just to bring it back to why LiFE, without sort of belaboring the point, obviously climate change is very real, the threat, and it's up to all of us. Everyone has a stake in it, and we all need to act. And therefore, when we talk of sustainable lifestyles, Amitabh spoke about urbanization, the circular economy. Again, what can individuals, families, and communities do during this momentous transitions which are taking place nationally and globally? So in terms of pro-climate lifestyle behavior, this can actually help the planet slash 40 to 70% reduction in GHG emissions by 2050. So this is an IPCC statistic. There's another UNEP statistic which says that individual behaviors can actually reduce emissions by up to 20%. And then, of course, as we discussed, LiFE will also help to strengthen adaptation strategies at an individual and community level. So what is Mission LiFE? We've spoken about LiFE as a movement. So LiFE, like many other programs in India, which Prime Minister Modi has been championing for the last 8 years in mission mode, LiFE is another one of those at-scale mission mode programs. Again, India-led global movement, but nationally to be rolled out, which brings individual and community behavior at the heart and center of climate action. So that's very, very important. Repeating the point about how individuals and communities can practice pro-planet people behavior. And this is being rolled out nationally now. And again, at NITI, we're working very closely with the Ministry of Forest, Environment and Climate Change together to roll this program out across India and again, ambitiously across the world. Now, again, clearly directly linked to SDG 12 and many other SDGs. As you know, SDG 12 talks about responsible production and consumption. The Prime Minister, when he introduced LiFE to the world at COP26 at Glasgow, spoke about mindful consumption and production. And so, again, this is at the heart of the SDG program. And of course, as you know, India has included LiFE as a part of its updated nationally determined contributions. So LiFE, I think we perhaps are the first country which has brought LiFE into its NDCs. Let's talk a little bit about how this is to be rolled out. As you saw, this is just a picture of Prime Minister Modi, the Secretary General of the UN, in launching Mission LiFE globally on the 20th of October. We were fortunate to have 10 countries, the heads of government and heads of state, endorsing the program at that point through recorded video messages. So again, that's a step towards making LiFE a global movement. Now, what are the key elements of LiFE? And I think Arunabha and Amitabh referred to this, but it's a very ambitious agenda. 1 billion people in India to take individual and collective action for the next 5 to 6 years. So this is being rolled out across the country in our federal systems, the state governments, the local governments, the communities, they're all working on LiFE. So there's accountability at every level. But if you look at how it's supposed to trigger, initially it's about nudging people into LiFE, climate and environmentally friendly behavior. that will in turn change demand. It will trigger demand for more life-friendly supply. So that demand is going to trigger supply in a climate-friendly and environmentally friendly manner. So production will be tailored to demand. And then, of course, it's also about changing policies and regulations. A lot of work has gone on already, but much more work to be done in terms of policies related to industry, to local governments, to urbanization. So all these policies are already being worked on. And important to emphasize, this is not sequential. All three elements of life are going on in parallel, so that we don't have to wait to nudge, to change demand, to sort of demand supply. It's all going to go on in parallel. Now, again, there is a list of 75 individual life actions across 7 categories. There is a mission document which has been jointly prepared by Niti Aayog as well as the Ministry of Forest and Environment. Those 7 categories are listed below. Let me just read them out. Energy saved, water saved, single-use plastic reduced, sustainable food systems adopted, waste reduced, healthy lifestyles adopted, and e-waste reduced. So those are the 7 buckets under which there are 75 individual life actions to celebrate the 75th anniversary of India's freedom. But again, these are indicative actions, and there will be many more actions which can be practiced by individuals and communities. But important to emphasize that all life actions need to be specific and measurable, easy to practice by individuals, communities, with minimal supply side dependencies. And I think an important point to emphasize, this is not about reducing consumption. It's just about becoming more responsible, more sustainable consumption, and a more sustainable lifestyle. And therefore, these actions are easy to practice by everyone, and all of them will lead to sort of pro-planet people impacts. And also they will promote economic activity, as we saw, because demand will trigger supply. And therefore, we will have greater economic activity as a result of LiFE. Now, again, what is the likely impact of Mission LiFE in India alone? Now, these are calculations undertaken by Niti, by our research team. But just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the impact of LiFE. Now, the calculation is that just switching off a car or scooter engines at traffic lights or railway crossings can save up to 22.5 billion kilowatt hours of energy. Turning off running taps when not in active use can save up to 9 trillion liters of water. That's adaptation for you. Using a cloth bag instead of plastic while shopping can save 375 tons of solid waste, can prevent it from entering the landfill, and discarding non-functioning gadgets by e-recycling can recycle up to 0.75 million tons of e-waste. And composting waste food at home can save up to 15 billion tons of food and prevent that from also going to landfill. So clearly a massive impact, just if you take these numbers, and there will be much more than this, which we need to calculate. And globally, the impact would be, much more than this. Let's talk a little bit about Mission LiFE Global. We've had some very good interactions with our development partners. I can see many of them are sitting there with you in the conference room. So development partners, UN agencies, civil society, international partners, international governments. And so now the idea is, how can Mission LiFE, in addition to being scaled up in India, go global? Because again, this is a kind of India-led, South-led global movement to promote climate-friendly actions. So we've had a number of discussions, a number of stakeholder meetings. We're going to take this forward even more, but critical to get stakeholders across the globe to integrate LiFE in their activities as well. A lot of it is going on already. Many countries around the world are already practicing LiFE type actions at an individual, community, institutional level. But we're talking of scale, national scale in India, and then global scale. So how do we do that? So again, there's been an endorsement by these 10 countries I mentioned on October 20th. So of course, there will be key stakeholders we are engaging with, but all the other countries as well. But more importantly, individuals in other countries. I'll come to that in the next slide. There's also a proposal from India. We're working with the Ministry of External Affairs on proposing a UN International LiFE Day the way it was done for yoga. And so this proposal is being mooted, and we'll be working in collaboration with and all the other countries to take this forward. The Prime Minister on June 5th of this year also launched a call for proposals. So ideas and research proposals have been invited from global universities and research institutes, precisely on this topic of how individuals can adopt climate-friendly actions in a measurable and attributable manner. So this call for action is still open in case any of you would like to apply, or institutions which would respond to this. The deadline is 31st December. So we still have another couple of weeks when proposals are coming in from all over the world, including from India. And we would encourage you to get your friends, colleagues, and partners to apply. So these will then be vetted. We'll select the top proposals. And then on June 5th, 2023, again, World Environment Day, we'll be having an international conference in India where we will be honoring the winners of these proposals and also giving them an award, which I've got to give Amitabh credit for. He was my predecessor in NITI. So he has instituted an award of $25,000, I believe, for the best papers. So we look forward to receiving proposals from all of you. Now, let me come to the last part of the presentation, which is Mission LiFE and G20. How can LiFE be actually integrated and mainstreamed into the working groups, into the conversation, and finally into the communique? So we have a few ideas on that. Hopefully you can deliberate upon them in the afternoon session and beyond. So again, I think one thing I would like to re-emphasize, something which Amitabh had mentioned earlier. This is all about walking the talk on climate action. While all the discussions are going on globally, this is how India is actually going to deliver on the ground. This is something with Prime Minister Modi, this is where he has led the world in terms of delivering services, basic services at scale. And therefore, it's all about the action. So LiFE is already underway in terms of getting implemented. So I think this is an important point to stress in all your deliberations. How can people, communities, and institutions walk the talk on sustainable lifestyles, each one from their perspective? So I think that's an important point we wanted to emphasize for the G20 conversation. Again, as I mentioned, how can some of the key principles of LiFE get embedded across all the working groups? And then, again, bringing together development and climate, something which Arunabha spoke about, green development. How can we integrate these two agendas, development and climate, which are actually very closely interlinked, by nudging people to adopt sustainable lifestyles? So we wanted to make that point as well. Again, with our multilateral partners, that's again one of the important agendas of the finance track, the reform of the multilateral agencies. I think it's critical now to make sure that LiFE and LiFE-related programs are embedded in their work programs. So again, that's an important point. Hopefully will be taken up in the finance group, but potentially in the Sherpa track as well. And then we are expecting and hoping that there would be some mention of LiFE in the final communique. And that text, we are working closely with Amitabh and his team on that. But again, it needs to get embedded across the board so that it's really reflected in the action plans and implementation plans coming out of the working group. So, we are very confident and hopeful that LiFE as a concept, as a program, as a call to action can get embedded in that final G20 communique. Thank you very much. I was supposed to take a couple of questions, but maybe if there are, I can do one. I have another meeting in a few minutes, but very happy to join you. Thanks once again for the opportunity. Thanks to Amitabh and Arunabha in particular. Thank you. Hi, Arunabha, I can't hear you.
Ms. Ayer?
Yeah, I'm good.
Great. Thank you so much for a very clear presentation. We will take maybe a couple of questions, but I had one for you. India has received support from many countries, as you talked about in your presentation on Mission LiFE. But, lifestyles ultimately, Mr. Ayer, is a very deeply personal matter. How do you envision in addition to the way the mission has been designed, galvanizing that individual action into something that aggregates at an economy-wide level?
Look, it's a great question, Arunabha. We've been discussing this for a while. I think we have to learn the lessons of other behavioral, linked programs, because as you know, life, as was mentioned earlier by you and Amitabh, is all about behavior change. A lot of climate-friendly lifestyle is already practiced traditionally in India. We need to learn from that. But if you have to take it to scale, you have to program for scale. So like in the Swachh Bharat mission, every village in India became accountable for making its village open defecation free. But they needed to be triggered into that behavior change. So I think the key elements, they've got to be incentivized, and they need to understand and how, changing their behavior and making it more climate and environment, that each household would save up to 50,000 rupees on account of avoided medical fees, real estate value, time saved. So I think that we need to do some of that economic analysis, and we need to promote life as not just good for the environment, good for the climate, the planet, but actually good for households and good for the economy.
Indeed, and no one better than you to know about how to take it to scale, especially through the Swachh Bharat mission. Maybe we have time for one question. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to pose a question to Mr. Iyer, either about what we're doing in India or how this goes across the rest of the world. Yes, yes, sir. If we could just get a microphone out to you. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation on LiFE. I'm Kamal Kumar Murari. I am faculty in Tata Institute of Social Science. And since I'm connected to academics, the point that you have actually made in your presentation were really good. My question is, in what way those principles of LiFE can be embedded in our schooling as well as college education?
All right, thank you. And I see one question here up front. Yes, sir. And then we'll get back to Mr. Iyer.
Great presentation, Mr. Iyer. I'm Anil Chaudhary. I run the Access to Information, or Aspire to Innovate program in the government of Bangladesh from ICT Ministry and Cabinet Division, supported by UNDP. I just wanted to, this is brilliant in terms of what you have aspired or conceptualized for behavioral nudge. But do you see that in parallel to that, infrastructure development and state-wise adoption of convenience for this behavioral nudge has to be also put forward, and also corporate incentives for such adoption in corporations, not in individuals? Just wanted to see if combination of incentives for corporations and infrastructure development for individuals, whether they would be included in the LiFE program.
I hope you could hear that, Mr. Iyer. One question on education and one question on incentives for businesses.
Yeah, no, I got both. I think both are excellent questions. And in fact, on the school front, there's no question that school kids are the best ambassadors for such radical behavior change programs at scale. And therefore, we've already been in touch with the Secretary of the Department of School Education. It is being put into the curriculum. And I think that will lead to a huge shift in behavior. So it's a great suggestion. It's already being done, but I think we need to do more. And, the best ambassadors, as I said, for any kind of behavior change are the kids. They pick it up quickly, they understand it, and they influence everyone, including their parents. On the incentives for industry or for the corporate sector, in my presentation, I'd already mentioned that a change in behavior is going to trigger a supply response. And therefore, the incentives for industry are already there. It's also part of the policy agenda related to LiFE. So there will need to be economic incentives, but I think the market itself will become the growing of the market for sustainable lifestyle related products will open up the market even more for the corporate sector to come in. So that will itself be an economic incentive, but certainly we will also need to, discuss with industry, get their views. There are many global programs. There's the 50-liter program, which is looking at, using just 50 liters. So a large agenda in terms of the incentives to the corporate sector, but we're working on that, and this will become clearer as we go along. As I said, it's not sequential; it all goes on in parallel.
Mr. Iyer, we really missed having you here in person, but thank you for articulating a very clear plan for the mission, both in India and globally. And all we can say as we say goodbye to you is, may you keep infusing life into life. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Arunabha. See you soon.
See you soon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we will now start with the first fireside conversation on boosting the SDGs with LiFE. I am pleased to call on stage our moderator for today's fireside, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Let's welcome her on stage with a big round of applause. We have our esteemed speakers gracing the stage, Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA. Let's welcome the lady with a big round of applause, please. Welcome, ma'am. May I invite Dr. Atsushi Watanabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies. Let's welcome him on stage with a round of applause. Welcome, sir. May I invite Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair, Terry, and former Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations. Let's welcome him on stage with a big round of applause. Welcome, sir. Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research. There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome him on stage. Welcome, sir. With that, Ms. Inamdar, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Now you can hear me. Thank you so much for that. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with this distinguished panel of speakers. Very often in the course of my coverage as a journalist, we hear the term sustainable development. It's become everyone's favorite buzzword. It's wheeled out at all corporate announcements. Companies love to talk about their net zero emissions and their goals and how environmental friendly they're going to be. It's what governments like to talk about as well. What I found very interesting about the concept of Mission Life, lifestyle for environment, is that it has a clear set of action points. There's a roadmap. And what we aim to do in session 1 is the how of it. How does it actually translate into real change? So with that, let me begin with Ms. Gauri. Ms. Gauri, I just want to add before I start, has been at the starting point of India's solar mission. One which is now recognized globally as being the cheapest, most efficient, and fastest growing. So there we have someone who's actually worked in turning a concept into reality. Let me begin, ma'am, by getting your thoughts on how Mission Life can be translated into the real world.
Thanks, Tamanna, and really great to be here. And great to be talking to such a distinguished audience. I think that potentially the whole concept of Mission Life to me looks like a fantastic way of breaking down the silos in which we think. So it's about really, and I'll give you a specific example from the world, the sector that I deal with, but it gives you a very clear pathway of thinking very differently, of to use the very often used cliche of thinking in a different paradigm. But if I had to talk about renewable energy, then to me it's about not thinking of renewable energy in a supply kind of a sense and energy efficiency in a different silo. But it's about how you can really talk about them together to look at outcomes that you want to deliver on the ground very differently from how you would do it if you were thinking of creating the policy frameworks separately for the two. So that I think is something that really strikes me about Mission Life. And secondly, and I think we've heard a lot about it, it's about unleashing the power of the collectives.
Right.
And so the policy frameworks as they are designed today, and I'm talking not just about in India or in many other countries, they still are very supply driven. So it's about saying that this is the outcome we want, but it's not about creating the platform where you can actually engage and bring communities and really unleash the power that the communities can bring. And I'll give you a quick example. I was talking to the German regulator very recently, and you know about the crisis that Europe's having. And he told me, you know, it's how much do you think is the elasticity of demand for the industry sector in Germany? And I thought, you know, industry in Germany is probably one of the most efficient. Right. So you're really looking at maybe 5 or 6%. And since he was asking about it, so I said, okay, 8%. And he said, you know, the industries completely took us unaware because our demand actually went down by 20%. So it's really about allowing people to be a partner in the whole, you know, space. So creating that policy space for partnerships to evolve rather than supply-driven, ways of doing action. And I'll give you a very quick example again of something, you know, because I've served a lot in Madhya Pradesh. So Indore, which is the cleanest city, we didn't think that, getting the household to look at bio waste and other waste differently and segregating it at the household is possible. But it's been shown in Indore that it's possible, and it's because you allowed space for the community to participate in it's a large vision.
The people take pride in it.
Absolutely.
People from Indore will say, I'm from the cleanest city.
Exactly. So it's about making that switch and giving, the policy becomes like a platform to engage with communities as partners, rather than, you know, saying that this is what you need to do.
Okay, so now the question is how. We took the example of solar energy. I don't know, can you hear me if I'm this side? Yeah. Mr. Nitin Desai, you wrote the book on climate policy, didn't you?
Oh, he wrote.
No, he wrote the book, but you know, you've been doing this for a long, long time. You've seen India's transformation journey, and we're sitting now here at a point where we're hoping Mission LiFE becomes a mass movement that India can lead globally as well. A lot of the 75 points of Mission LiFE hark back to traditions, to Indian traditions, using the kulhad, for example, instead of teacups, etc. How imperative do you think it is to marry this idea with what people already naturally do, and how can that be taken forward?
Let me just say this, that in many ways, what the list of 75 that I've seen is interesting. There are just a couple of things that I would stress. One, you cannot address the issue of making consumption sustainable unless you also address the issue of the inequality of income. If I look at our country, the top 10% of the people account for the bulk of the emissions that we have to cope with. The middle 40% is more or less on average, and the poorest 50% are way below the normal. In fact, you should accept that their consumption will go up. Their emissions will go up, because otherwise they will not get out of poverty. So we need a policy which nudges those whose consumption is way above the average initially. That is what we should do. Second, I think we should increasingly focus also on the side benefits which arise from, say, you ask people to do things to reduce carbon emissions, but it will also have positive things on air quality, positive things on health. And in many ways, that will persuade people a little more quickly, because that's immediate. It's not long-term in nature. And that will persuade people immediately to get into that. And the third thing is, how do I get the commercial system to start paying more attention? And this is where we have to start looking at the way credit systems which really direct the direction of investment function. And this is the area where new thing which has come out is blended finance, where concessional finance given by governments or philanthropic societies can be used to leverage commercial capital in the right direction. So I would say that if you have to start looking for things, do not forget, you must pay serious attention initially to the people who are consuming well above the national average. And incidentally, globally also the same thing should apply, but we'll probably go into that a little later. And second, start focusing as much attention on the immediate benefits that will come from such behavior, and not just on the long-term benefit because of carbon emission reductions.
I want to actually take that thought further. So being environmentally friendly is seen as a penalty you must pay for a greener environment. You're talking about the top 10% making those cuts, instead of asking those who haven't gotten to that point to pollute enough. The concept of LiFE, though, and let me just go to Mr. Dibash on this, talks about not dampening down economic activity. Developing nations, and not just India, don't want to hold back consumption. We need consumption to increase. I mean, we are a consumption-driven economy. How do you ensure that sustainability does not become a sacrifice?
Thank you, and I'm really pleased to be part of this panel. I think a good place to pick up the conversation is where our colleague from IRENA started, which is to say that our orientation has been far too much on the supply side. And if you look at the demand side, then the question becomes, and this speaks to Mr. Desai's point about equity and aspiration and being able to actually achieve decent living. People don't want energy. They want the services that energy brings them, right? They don't want a car, or sometimes they do want a car, but it's about the mobility services. It's about the cooling services and so on and so forth. It's about the cooking services. So if we focus on the demand side, then the focus is on how to provide those services rather than how to provide the energy that leads to those services. So if you can have more services per unit energy, then you both allow for people to have, in a sense, more consumption of services while treading lighter on the earth, right? So it's that shift in mindset that I think that's really important. And that's the core of the demand side agenda. Now, I will just say this, that shifts in individual behavior, which is one of the core ideas behind LiFE, is essential to this change in demand. Behavioral change is essential to it, but it's not the only part of it. So to bring about a shift in demand, a demand perspective, you need individual change, but you also need the infrastructures to change. You also need the policies to change to support it. So, for example, transport is a great example. So some estimates from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say that you can save about 2 tons of carbon per person per year with a shift to public transport and electric vehicles, right? But if you're going to ask people to take public transport, then you need to have clean, efficient, timely public transport available. We have to be willing to invest in that. So I think these things go hand in hand. And I think if we think in that way, with the orientation about how do you provide the service rather than how do you provide the energy, that's what allows us to both ramp up lifestyles as well as do it in a way that's much lighter on the earth.
I suppose the question is, where is the incentive? Where is the incentive, for example, for rural populations to change their habits? And Dr. Watabe, this is something that you study very, very closely. What would incentivize people who are still aspiring for more to then think about what is the impact of my choices on the environment?
Well, thank you. My answer may not be direct to your question, but as Dr. Dibash took up the mobility service as an example, I will continue this discussion. Well, what we do in the cities or communities, rural communities, about decarbonizing lifestyle is first identify 50 or 60 options of behaviors which people can reduce their carbon footprint.
including the reduction of private vehicle use and using more public transportation or bicycling. However, particularly for the rural population, it's really very difficult to reduce private car use because even in countries like Japan, the public transportation service is already cut down because of depopulation, shrinking economy, and so on. So in this context, if we tell rural people, please stop using private car from today, no one listens to us because they need to take their kids to school, they need to take their parents to hospitals. And there's no reduced public transportation. But if we start talk about, can you still depend on private vehicle driving when you become older and no one in the society can drive alone? Then people are more keen on discussing what kind of alternative mobility system they need for the society for keep their essential services. And that's their entry point for aligning people as the partner for creating alternative demand systems instead of asking individual behavior changes.
So in the context of LiFE, Dr. Bhattav, and that's a follow-up for you. You've seen some of the points that India has put out as examples of things that can be done on an individual level. What would be the parallel in Japan, for example, that culturally fits into ways that can preserve the environment, that are eco-friendly, and also lead to sustainable development? What would be those parallels?
Well, in the context of Japan, we are facing a lot of challenges because of the aging, for example, or
Yes.
shrinking population and the devastation of the rural infrastructure. So in our society, the one clear entry point is how we can keep their services or renew their infrastructure that is more resilient to the climate-related disasters, which we are facing more and more in recent years. So that's how we can achieve the both adaptation and mitigation, and also preventing the poverty, which is expected in the near future of our society.
Okay, Ms. Singh, let's come back to the basic point of incentivizing people to change. And let's take it from the point of view of renewable energy. For example, people will move if it's cheaper. It's a better quality service, there's less interruption, and at the end of the day, it costs less. So now how do you bring that back to an individual choice?
So, interesting question, because, you know, I think that's something that's really, it's pretty much on top of the mind of many policymakers. But if I had to answer your question with an example, then, you know, if you're looking, and, you know, Mr. Amitabh Kant spoke about the increasing urbanization. That's not just a India phenomena, it's a phenomena in most of the emerging economies and developing economies will see. With that will come a whole, you know, a whole set of people, of young people who are professionals, who are looking, who are upwardly mobile, understand, have an awareness of the issues around climate. But how do you really tap into that kind of a, you know, how do you actually get them to contribute to the whole concept of making choices that are green and making choices that are probably right? So the first thing, of course, I do want to say that as of today, and for some years, renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy. So it's not about it being more costly, because it is now not just competitive with fossil fuels, but cheaper. But it's about, you know, if there is an urban, upwardly mobile professional who's staying in a rented accommodation in Bombay, and you tell him that, you know, tell him or her that there is, make the right choice. Now, the question that will come up is, look, what are my options? How do I get green energy? I don't own the roof, so how do I get solar and get the green energy. So I think that's where you need to bring in the policy that gets people like this to be able to contribute. So can we think about virtual rooftops that allow a professional like someone living in Bombay without a roof space to be able to buy renewable energy or green power into their, to meet their needs, and to be able to get that kind of a digital certification of if they move from Bombay to Delhi, can they carry that kind of a thing along? So it's really about thinking very differently about how we do policy now. It's about really changing our mindset into making people who are ready to contribute as partners and giving them the space to be partners.
Mr. Desai, I want to follow up on what you said about equitable responsibility. And I think that's very interesting, because we in India, and I want to extend this to, I'm sure, developing countries, of course, have a large aspirational population. Everyone wants to own more, wants the next new phone. And I'm saying that because one of the 75 points of life is repair your gadget, don't buy a new one. But we want people to buy new ones as well. So how do you balance that?
See, it said the focusing on these differences plays a role. Let me give you an example. I don't know how if you remember, we had this change in the LPGs.
Yes, give it up.
To give up, and you asked people, nudged people into giving up their rights to subsidize LPG.
Yes.
And what you focused on was this will help us to get LPG to poorer people.
Yes.
That was a focus. That worked. Millions of people gave up on the nudge. There was no compulsion. It was just a nudge, but the nudge worked because they could see the translation of what they were doing into benefits, of an immediate benefit for some people. And you remember that happened. So what I'm saying is, even from the perspective of persuading rich people to, and remember this, I must say this, at global level, about something like 47% of the global carbon emissions come from the top 10%, and most of those top percent live in the rich countries. Practically all of them live in the rich countries. There are a handful in the middle income countries. So I'd say that unless you also connect what we're asking the rich people to do, reduce your consumption, not just make it more carbon friendly, but also reduce the totals, will also mean benefits of this sort for this, that can work. So I would urge that looking, that's one example here. Can I start just changing petrol prices in order to encourage people to use less petrol? Now, what will happen in India is, it will have very little effect on the rich. Very little.
I think you've touched a zone of petrol prices is a huge issue in India. And
I know, but it doesn't have any effect on how much, right? So the middle two-wheeler people will be a little bit. The people who suffer are the poorest 50 who take public transport and have to pay more for their travel. So be careful. Use nudges. Don't forget that you can't treat, you need three economic policies, one for the top 10%, one for the middle 40%, and one for the bottom 50%. One single energy policy is not the right answer when it comes to consumption management.
But what is the point of persuasion, Mr. Dubash? Is it that you are appealing to people's morality and conscience? Mr. Desai gave the example of give it up. I did in the first month. I was very excited about it to tell people that I gave it up. But a lot of people might not have. They would have said that, this is something we get as taxpayers from the government. Why should I give it up? So if you're going to hinge your plan on appealing to people's better side, is that going to be enough?
I think that for something like this, and it is meant to be a movement, you can't just have one arrow in your quiver, right? You have to have multiple arrows. So on occasion, where the link to the benefits to the poor is so clear, this kind of moral suasion may work, like the Give It Up campaign. In other cases, like, for example, with transportation. It's a question of how you construct what is it that people aspire to, right? So we actually have an interesting example in Delhi, which was actually a salutary lesson in some ways. We had a bus rapid transit system, which in many parts of the world has worked well, but it wasn't actually set up and marketed as something that was part of a modern forward-looking city. And I think that that's the important thing to learn from. So we have the same sort of elites in India, for example, who might travel to London and Paris and feel very modern, pulling out their phone and using their app and jumping on a bus, but wouldn't think of doing it here in India. And so it comes back to partly the infrastructure has to be at a quality where people are willing to do that. And that's not just to attract the rich, it's most important for middle and income and poorer populations who rely on it much more. But to create that image that the way we want to live going forward is a city that is cleaner, that has less pollution, where we have healthful lifestyles, where we walk reasonable distances. And that's what modernity is. Modernity may not be, in fact, each of us in individual bubbles of cars. It's a way in which you change our collective thinking. And that requires a combination of incentive structures, policies, and so on, public investment, behavioral change, education, as somebody said earlier. So this idea of a package of policies around which people's behavior shifts over time, I think is what we have to aspire to.
Yeah. But one thing that which needs to be done, the government must tell us what is the environmental impact of its own spending. Do they? They don't tell us. Do I have any number on what is the government impact of governmental spending? Why cannot they make an assessment and give me a number on what is the carbon impact of their spending? We are doing it increasingly in corporations. Yes. Corporations have started giving numbers of the carbon impact of their activities, at least scope 1 activities. They don't really do the total. So why can't the government do that? Why can't the government start using government procurement as a way of pushing this agenda? Just as besides blended finance, government spending also can be used to push the direction of investment in a certain way. So I'd like to see what is the carbon impact of this meeting. I won't get that, will I?
Well, I think we should open up to questions. We have a fantastic panel here, and I'm sure there are, more detailed questions than I can put across. Yes, I can see a hand going up there. Someone can just get them a mic.
Yeah, this is Yusuf. I'm from UNICEF India office, Yusuf Kabir. I think, can you hear me?
If you can be a little louder.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah,
yes.
This is Yusuf Kabir from UNICEF Mumbai office. I think it's a very interesting discussion. Just I would like two submission here. Like who are the at the impact of the climate? It's mostly the poorest of the poor, people living in the slums, and also rural population. So since it is the first development working group meeting, it is also advisable that we should also hear from them actually how they see the climate actions. Unfortunately, we should not decide on our own because they are at the ground facing all the climate realities. Because the climate justice and inequality is a very important point. And rightly, Professor Desai mentioned about if you want to see the carbon footprint of this particular workshop, yes. So we may not be doing the justice. So one suggestion is that to include those beneficiary stakeholders, youth and children, because ultimately we are doing for the youth and children, their voices should also be heard. And just one last suggestion to the panels, that in India, the Ministry of Panchayati Raj has doing a very interesting program called localization of SDGs, where they are going for clean and green villages. So there is always a lot of opportunity is there to mainstream whatever discussion is happening, because ultimately, as Mr. Iyer also mentioned, and also Professor, both the professors mentioned.
Yusuf, is there a question for someone?
Yeah, the question is that how are you going to include the other stakeholders in the working group and discussion to take this forward?
And who is that question for?
Anyone from the panel can answer. Because I don't see audience anywhere. Its entire audience is.
Where is the rest? Where are the people who have to make the change, and where is their inclusion? Ms. Singh, do you want to take that?
No, I really like the question, because that's exactly the point that I was trying to emphasize, that you have to move from policies that are supply driven to policies that can accommodate and be a response to the kind of demand that's coming. So this distinction of we are the policy makers making policy for a set of beneficiaries who are going to be the passive recipients, that actually, and for me, that's what life is about, because it's moving away from that arrogance of we are the ones who are giving you something or the way of doing something to people who are going to be passive recipients, to actually changing it more in terms of, well, there are no givers or there are no recipients, but partners.
Ma'am, may I just add to that? It's a bit of a catch-22, because if you name any initiative, it comes back to it's the government's job to implement it.
And it will remain so if that's the way we market our policy.
Right.
But if I can give you an example of watershed development, which was all about community trying to take, so there were some enabling features in the policy that allowed them a funding source, that allowed them to think through how they want to develop their village and their common lands. And that really involved them to take decisions and do the action on the ground. So, the assumption that people out there don't understand what they want, I think that's a wrong assumption.
Yes, the lady over here. I'll come back to you, sir, but the lady over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Harsha. I'm representing International Institute for CSR and Sustainability. So what y'all are discussing is what we are teaching our students. My question to you is, how do we ensure circular economy? You cannot control consumerism. You cannot ask a person not to eat chips or chocolates or Coke. You can't just do that. You cannot hold a person from buying a new electronic gadget. But how do you ensure that the corporates who are manufacturing it take it back? And what kind of policies can the government implement and execute to give benefits to those corporates who take back even a nail polish bottle? You see, I have lots of them. I don't know what to do. So how do we ensure that these two could be implemented instead of asking consumers like us to stop buying? Thank you.
Fantastic question, Harsha. Do you want to direct it to someone specifically?
For all of you.
Okay. Okay. Navroz Dawash wants to take that. Yes.
Thank you. Great question. I'm sure I'm sorry to jump ahead of my co-panelists here, but as you were speaking, an example came to my mind that I thought might be worth sharing. And again, it speaks to this kind of leverage effect of individual action and clever policy. At some point and I can't remember the exact date, I think in Germany, they passed a law that basically said that any shop or supermarket is legally liable to dispose effectively of any waste that is generated on its premises, right? They then basically, using that, various social movements persuaded consumers to strip off any excess packaging and leave it in the store, right? So that excess packaging became something that the supermarket chain or the company, the retail company, was responsible then for disposing, which increased their costs. So they sent the signal backward up the supply chain to their providers, saying, we really need to see much less packaging. So it's a really good way of how individual behavior can drive change up through the supply chain when it's enabled by legislative change. So that kind of sort of jujitsu is what I think is very productive. If you can bring those kinds of forces together to reinforce each other.
All right, one more question. Yes, sir.
Is this on? Yeah. Karthikeya Sarabhai from the Center for Environment Education.
Sir, can I request you to speak louder?
Yeah, Karthikeya Sarabhai from the Center for Environment Education. When Abdul Kalam was president, he often talked about this thing which he called Pura, which is providing urban services in rural areas. Now, I wonder when we are looking at new models for India, whether we are taking urbanization that into major metros as the only way forward or as an inevitability, or the fact that we have so many small towns that whether we should put emphasis on providing that services in smaller establishments, in smaller towns, to decrease the carbon footprint of these cities. And because of the internet, because of what we saw happening post-COVID, it is possible and it's viable today to work that way. Now, what is happening in many of our cities is that the rich are moving out onto the periphery because they can afford it. And if you ask a housing developer, they say, no, we are building a lot of things outside, but they're for the rich, who can work through internet and everything else. And we are seeing this change happening because of technology. So I was wondering whether we are rethinking our urban policy or are we taking it as an inevitable?
Would you like to take that? Oh, you didn't get the... I think if I understand it correctly, because the voice was a little muffled, are we going to have the same blueprint when we're developing towns and villages as we have in cities? Is that the question broadly?
Yeah, are we just focusing on the inevitable that large cities will become bigger metropolitan areas? Or are we consciously trying to develop smaller towns, smaller cities, villages, so that they become viable modern places to live in?
All right. So where you reduce the migration into larger cities.
Larger cities have more carbon footprints.
Yes.
No, I think well, certainly any type of greater localization of development, etc., will help in this sphere. This is a possibility, which is now more easier. One of the things that you can say about the new energy, wind and solar, is it is possible to have decentralization to much greater extent with wind and solar energy than with highly centralized sources of coal-based power and so on. In fact, the fact is the energy system will change because nobody owns wind and solar energy. The energy source is not owned by anybody. It's entirely a matter of what can be done. So yes, certainly localization will help. And the other thing that will help is the emergence of information technology and so on. I think that's the future that is ahead of us. If you're interested, I have a nice piece in the contributions on Indian sociology on this. It's called Energy, Climate, and Structural Change. Have a look at it.
All right. I think we will take a short break and wrap this session. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's have a big, big round of applause for them. That was truly an enlightening and pertinent discussion. And I'd like to thank you, Ms. Inamdar, for expertly steering the panel as well. I request our speakers to please remain on stage to receive their G20 mementos to commemorate this special event. Let me invite the G20 DWG co-chair, Ms. Inam Gambhir, on stage to please present mementos to our esteemed panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I will need a lot of applause for our panelists, and that will also energize us, so to say. So I'm going to request you, ma'am, to present the first one to Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA. Let's have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Ma'am, may I request you to present the next one to Dr. Atsushi Watanabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies. Let's welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank him with a big round of applause. Thank you so much for the applause. Ma'am, please present to Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair Terry, and former Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, UN. Let's have a big round of applause to Mr. Nitin Desai. Thank you for the applause, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research. We thank you very much, sir. Please accept this small token. A big round of applause for him as well. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, our very able moderator, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Can we have the memento for Ms. Inamdar? Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Thank you very much once again. Panelists, the photographers may need a photo opportunity, a group photo opportunity of the panel, and I would request Ms. Gambhir to please join them. Thank you once again. Thank you, ma'am, for doing the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now really my honor to call upon our first inspirational speaker for today, Ms. Ligia Noronha, the UN Assistant Secretary General and Head, UN Environment, New York, who's going to be sharing her perspective on achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Please help me welcome the lady with a big round of applause, Ms. Ligia Noronha, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Oh, that light is too strong. It gets me in the eye. So I'm indeed absolutely honored to be here today. I'm not going to be an inspirational speaker, but I'm very happy to share my views and of course congratulate the government of India for this very important initiative that they've just started. But I want to take back a little bit on where we've started today. And this panel was amazing because it really helped me also to put forward these ideas. If you look at 50 years, this year we had Stockholm plus 50, which was 50 years since the environmental movement started. And one of the important findings, which the CEW and the SCI report, was about how we moved from a situation of underdevelopment and scarcity to one of overdevelopment and affluence, and the planetary footprints that went with it. And this is really important to think about, because this is where we had Mr. Nitin Desai just mentioned the issues of overconsumption that we're going to hear about. All this has given rise to a certain amount of environmental and social injustices. And as a result of that, we see, and we've seen it in the number of COPs that we've had this year, a certain amount of distrust between countries of the North and countries of the South, and between peoples within countries. And so this distrust is creating a certain momentum for change. We see this particularly amongst young people. Young people have been talking about what is it in it for them for the future. There is a growing angst about climate injustice. There's a growing angst about environmental degradation. There's a real rising concern that the future for them is not so bright. This is not just what we hear in the COPs or what we hear on Fridays for the Future, but this is what we've been hearing when groups come to meet with us in our own offices saying, you know, what's in it for us? So ladies and gentlemen, this is a time for us all to listen to what the youth have to say, to what the vulnerable have to say, to what the marginal have to say, but we are not listening because they haven't had the opportunity to voice them sometimes. It's in this context that we also need to look at the fact that we're not meeting any of the goals that we said we were going to meet. And we've been hearing that since morning. The IPCC has already said that, the IPBES on biodiversity has mentioned it. We are in a situation where the global commitments are not being met. And we are in a situation where they have to be met. We are in a situation where we have to scale up all of these. And yet we have a number of what we call hurdles on the way. The war, for example, has created new concerns about energy security in many countries. This has also created food security concerns in many countries. So the kinds of dynamics that we're hearing today are similar to the dynamics we've heard before. Energy security, priorities of what is it that we should be focusing on, what is it that, what should be the pace of the transition, development versus the environment. And so in this context, what we're hearing today is really welcome. But the important thing to note is that we need system level changes, and we've already been hearing that. System level changes in terms of low or carbon or zero carbon economies. We need circularity, we need cleanliness, we need restoration, and of course we need the financial alignment with the real economy. Now, one of the reasons I'm here is because we've been working on sustainable consumption and production, SDG 12, for a number of years. The 10-year framework of programs completes 10 years, December 22. And it's just been given an extension. And yet we feel that it has not achieved enough. The SDG 12 has not achieved enough. because many of the programs of the SDG 12, of the Sustainable Consumption Production 10-year framework of programs, has resulted in policy instruments which have been disconnected, and we need this collective movement forward. We need to move to what we've been hearing about in terms of creating this collective